on to our keynote. How do you introduce Haas's funniest alum? I struggled with this, so I thought I'll go find my favorite Dilbert cartoon. I actually have this one from a newspaper, I know, a long time ago. That's how long I've been a fan. It's cut out from a newspaper, and it's framed and in my office. So, yeah, I'll just give you a minute to read it. So in introducing Scott, I just want to thank you for helping us to laugh at ourselves and making it totally socially acceptable to laugh at all the people that drive us crazy. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
So how many of you have seen a Dilbert comic at some point? All right, good. I'm in the right room. All right. You know, when Dilbert started taking off and becoming successful, a lot of people said to me, you know, comic boy, you're pretty good at making fun of people and making fun of what they're doing and their management style and their leadership. What suggestions do you have? What advice can you give that's better than all this stuff you're mocking? And I thought, well, that's actually a reasonably good question. And then I realized how much harder that was than mocking things. And I thought, that's a terrible job. I don't want to be in that job. But I also realized that there's a problem with advice. All right? Advice is completely broken. If I gave you all the advice, somehow accurately, of all the things I did to become a world-famous cartoonist, would it work for you? Probably not, right? You're a different person, the situation has changed, environment's changed, everything's different. Likewise, I can't possibly know what your internal thoughts are. I don't know how you prioritize things. I don't know that those things change 3 times before a lunch. So any advice I give you is going to be some kind of generic thing anyway, and probably won't apply to you specifically. But now you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, that's not true. Because the big stuff applies to everybody, right? Like, at least work hard. Yeah, that's pretty universal. But you know, the 3 or 4 richest people I know, just personally, they don't really work very hard. And they never did, right? And you could go right down the line of things that you're supposed to do. They're just absolutely, you're supposed to do this. And I'll give you 3 examples of people I know personally who didn't do any of that stuff, right? So advice isn't good. But here's what I think is good. If you want to fix something in your garage that's broken and you only have 1 tool, chances are you're not going to be able to fix that thing. But if you have a garage full of tools, probably you got a better shot at it. So I'm going to give you a contrarian view of this topic of success. And its primary value is not that you follow mine and ignore all the other people who had what sounded like good advice when you heard it, but rather you've got both models in your head now, all right? 2 tools. So sometimes you might be in a situation where you say, I think I got to work hard. Sometimes you might be in a situation where you think, maybe that cartoonist guy said something that applies in this situation. So here's my contrarian view. I have no idea if any of this will work, but. So okay. So I'm going to be telling you that goals are for losers, passion is overrated, and that luck can be manipulated, not directly, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Now, before I talk about those things, you need a little bit of background about me. I'm probably the least successful person you've ever met. As I was getting ready to do this presentation for other group, I wanted to count up how many business failures I had, just to get a context. I stopped counting at 36, not because I was done. I was kind of running out of space, right? And I was crying on my keyboard as I was doing it. It was terrible. And this is just my business failures, right? This is not even my personal stuff. And I've got failures in all kinds of categories. I built software that didn't work. I've had 2 restaurants that didn't work. I probably needed that waiting list app thing. I started a food company that didn't work. I've bought real estate high and sold it low several times, it turns out. If you tried to do that, you couldn't do it. I mean, that took some skill. But it turns out that not everything you do fails, right? Every once in a while, something works. In my experience, about 1 in 10 things work for me. Now, granted, I usually pick things which have that nature, right? There are things which probably it isn't going to work, but if it did, it would be amazing, right? So I always pick projects like that, knowing that I'm going to have to grind through a few before the law of numbers makes it work. So let me give you one example. I'll just pick one from the list, just to give you a feel for how miserable some of these failures were and how pathetic. When I was 19, I had this idea for an invention to keep tennis players' hands dry when they played, especially outdoors. Your hand would get all sweaty and it would slip off the grip. So bowlers had this solved. They would have a little rosin bag they would hit between bowling frames, but you couldn't really carry that in the court. So I thought to myself, I will solve this. I will connect that little rosin bag with Velcro to a pair of shorts. And this will be my invention, because you could take the Velcro off to wash the shorts, everybody wins. So I took this idea to a lawyer in my town. He was the only lawyer in the town, and I explained my idea, and he sat there in silence for a little while, and he stared at me. And then he spoke very slowly, because I think he felt I needed this. And he said, just because you can connect two existing products with Velcro, that doesn't mean you've invented something. But in the process of not inventing something, I did learn a whole bunch about how you do get a patent, all right? And that has come in very handy. I have a startup of my own on the side. We have lots of conversations about, is this patentable, is that not? I learned a ton. So keep that in mind, because this is going to be an important point I'll come back to here. So although most of my businesses didn't work out, there were a few that did. Dilbert, for example. Let me read this one. Wearable computing is the next big thing. This is my prototype of a necklace computer. Prepare to be shocked. Did you just talk him into wearing a remotely controlled shock collar? People think I have no goals. All right, speaking of goals, I say goals are for losers. Now, obviously, there's an exception to that. If your situation is simple, very constrained, such as you're entering this event, all right? That's clearly a goal to win the event, all right? So if your situation is simple, goals make sense. But we don't live in those times, right? It's not like in the olden times when a farmer said, I think I'll clear 40 acres before winter. That was a good idea. And when winter comes and he's done all that work, months have gone by, it still was a good idea, right? Simple idea, simple execution, it's great. But now fast forward to today. Today, you've got more complexity in your pocket than the farmer had in his entire operation. If you're picking a phone and say, what insurance do I need? What plan? How much data am I going to use? What model? Blah, blah, blah. It goes on forever. In this situation, having a goal is a little bit limiting. It's a little bit like this. It would be a little bit like being on horseback with a bow and arrow, and you're at a full gallop, and you're shooting at a target that's in the forest, right? It's behind the trees, and it's running back and forth, the target is, and it's foggy, and you only brought one arrow, right? But you got a goal, right? So the environment's changing, but you're like, I hope this still is a good idea. I hope I can hit that goal. But if enough people run into the forest, enough horses with enough arrows, shooting arrows into the air, sooner or later, somebody's going to hit a target. And when he does, he's going to write a book, and it's going to say, it's a good thing I had a goal. Right? And what about all those other people? All those people who fired the arrows that didn't miss? How about their book contract? They didn't get one, right? So you have this impression that goal was important because that one guy hit one. Okay. Here's another problem with goals. The whole point of a goal, right, is to narrowly focus, all right, to shut out the world. This is my goal. I'm going to focus on it. The problem is, all the fun stuff might be in the world you shut out, right? That's where everything's changing. So your little goal that you focused on, tomorrow you might think pivoting was a better idea. And if you're not looking for the opportunities elsewhere, you might miss the much bigger opportunity that was right next to you. So what's better than a goal, right? If goals don't work, what do I suggest? And I suggest systems. And I'm going to define system a special way, all right? Here's my definition. It's something you're doing on a regular basis that improves your odds in a general way toward some general desirable area. But here's the important part. Along the way, it's making you more valuable, all right? So that no matter what happens with your projects that you're taking on, whether they win or don't win, you personally are always coming out of it more valuable, all right? So the only way to explain this well is with examples. So I'm going to run you through a few examples so you can see what this looks like. In high school, I had a friend, Manuel. He and I, we both like girls. We both wanted to have a girlfriend, but we had very different approaches. I had what I would call more of a goal-oriented approach. I would choose a girl that I thought was going to be the perfect girlfriend for me. She was, just had all the qualifications I was looking for, and I would research her, I'd find out who her friends were, I'd know what organization she was involved in. We didn't call it stalking back then. But I think it applies. Now, at the end of this process, it was a very long process. It took months. Eventually, I would have to actually approach the girl, and usually I did one of these ways. Sometimes she would say, I have a boyfriend. Okay, can't win them all. Sometimes she would say, I don't like you. All right, everybody's got personal preferences. But sometimes, and this didn't happen often, but once in a while, she would say, I have a boyfriend and I don't like you. Now, I'm happy to say that I did not contribute to teen pregnancy whatsoever. I cannot speak for Manuel, who had a system as opposed to a goal. His system was this. He would go where girls were. Good system. He would go in descending order of attractiveness and ask every one of them to be his girlfriend. As you might imagine, his hit rate was very low. But this isn't a story about, keep trying, if law of big numbers, if you keep doing things, eventually somebody's going to say yes. That's part of the story, but that was kind of obvious, right? Part of the story that's interesting is he was learning something while I was stalking, I guess. He was figuring out what lines work, how to approach people, how to approach strangers, how to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. He's probably the best salesman in the world right now, or in jail. I don't know. It's one of those two things. But that's what defines the system, right? He was getting smarter. Here's another example, kind of an offbeat one. I had a friend who worked at home. He was a tech guy. He was a CTO of a company. Great job. Loved his job. But he didn't have any network opportunities working at home. So he would go on job interviews for jobs he didn't want. Jobs that paid far less. Jobs that had terrible commutes. And he would do it for practice, because he figured someday he might need to actually get another job. And he would have all this practice. But beyond that, he was also exposing himself to lots of people in networking. So one day he went on yet another job that he was terribly overqualified for. At the end of the interview, the guy loved him, and this was part of his strategy. He was meeting people, exactly the people who were important to his career, lots of them. And they all loved him because he was overqualified for the job when he left. This interviewer said, you're overqualified for this job, but our CTO's leaving. Maybe you'd have that job. So it turns out he got this huge promotion by applying for jobs he didn't want. And that was his system. He actually told me in advance before any of this happened. Here's another example. This is what I do. I layer complementary skills. Now, the complementary skills that I'm putting together are things like public speaking, languages. Psychology, I'm going to pause here for a moment. There are about 50 or 100 psychology concepts, principles of persuasion. If you don't know that there are that many, somebody is using that stuff against you, all right? And it would really help if you knew it. So you can layer that on top of whatever else you're good at, and that's going to be a big add, all right? And what's important about layering these relatively easily attainable skills, you can take a class, you can do a little reading, and design is especially one I call out, because everything you do is design. All right, my slides are designed, your pitches are designed, they've all got design. You build a website, that's design. You can learn everything, I'd say about 80% of what you need to know in design, you can learn in about 10 minutes. It's the other 20% you have to go to school for and become an expert. So that's a good hour spent right there. How powerful is this? Well, it's powerful because if you're not Tiger Woods, you're not born and you're 6 years old and you're like, I think I'm going to be the best in the world at this thing. I'm pretty good right now. If you didn't have that feeling when you're 6, you probably had to layer together some average skills to get where you are. All right, these are some of the average skills that I've layered together. And the result is that although I'm a mediocre artist, there's probably in the room like this, I would guess 10 people who are better artists than I am. All right. I'll never win a writing award, in fact, never took a writing class, but I can write simple sentences and put them together. Again, in this room, 25 people write better than me, probably. Better than I don't know. You can see what I'm talking about. Case in point. I'm also usually not the funniest person in the room, even in my own house. If I have a party, I'm like the third funniest person. But here's the thing. You put all this stuff together, you add to it my the little bit I paid attention was when I was in the MBA program, and I've got a unique combination. There are very few people who can write a little, they're pretty funny, and they can draw a picture, and they've got enough business experience to put it together and create a business out of it. In the past 25 years, there's been one real breakout comic, and it was Dilbert. And that was primarily because of my Haas experience. That's a longer story, but what I brought to cartooning was a business. Well, I'll have to ask you about that later. Like I said, sometimes I am the funniest guy in the room, and it might be only one person who gets it. But all right, so the result of these layering of complementary skills is Dilbert's doing pretty well. All right, let me give you some other examples of systems over goals. I would pause here to say, if you've ever taken important advice on health or fitness from a cartoonist, it probably didn't work out that well for you. So none of this is advice. It is what I do, but I don't advise it again because you're all different and I'm not a doctor. It's just an example of systems versus goals. Now, most people approach a diet as a goal. I'm going to lose 10 pounds, right? And you have to use willpower. Avoid the cookie, and it's painful and it hurts the entire time. Obviously, that doesn't work so well. You've all had the experience of seeing other people try it, and it doesn't work. They're miserable. A system, in contrast, would look like this, where you would replace willpower with knowledge over time. All right? Now, when I first say that, you say, how do you replace willpower with knowledge? Those are like not even the same thing, so I have to give you some examples. Let's say you and I go to the salad bar. We're both hungry, and it's a terrible salad bar. All it has is a white potato and some regular pasta. And we're boring. We're not going to put anything on it. But we're watching our waistline. All right, I want you to raise your hands if you think the potato is the better choice for raising your waist. Okay. Raise your hand if you think the pasta is the better choice. Okay. Kind of mixed. All right. Half of you got fat today. Right. Half of you chose wrong. Right. Now, the answer is the potato has a higher glycemic index. It's terrible. Pasta should have a higher glycemic index, but probably because of the preparation or whatever, it lowers it. Science is a little unclear about that, but there's a big difference. Right? If I knew that and you didn't, I use knowledge, you use willpower, and at the end of the month, I'm the same weight, and you say, that cartoonist has a high metabolism. All right? Here's another example. The food that you want to eat, the stuff that gives you cravings, the taste of that, let's say that's up here, all right? But you haven't spent much time figuring out what's healthy food, what healthy food is, so your idea of it is like sawdust and wood chips and stuff like down here. Over the years, I've made it a habit on a very regular basis to experiment with this stuff to raise it up a little bit. So my personal palate, again, don't recommend this, is that I've discovered by trial and error that when I add soy sauce to a yam, which is actually a good food, it's delicious, right? So I can eat a yam with soy sauce, like perfect food, and I have entire enjoyment, as much as I would have for these bad foods. It took me a long time to find that out, but I've accumulated all these pieces of facts that replace my need for willpower. Raise your hand if you knew that eating peanuts is correlated with lower weight. In other words, maintaining or losing weight. Did anybody know that? Yeah, a few people knew it, right? So those are the types of nuggets you pick up. So when I'm tired, I eat peanuts. When I'm hungry, I eat peanuts. My next topic was, how many knew that when you're tired, your body registers it as hunger? Raise your hand if you knew that. All right? So a few more, but still only about a third. And this is a highly informed group here. Right? So imagine that times 50. All right. What I do is eat all day long, and I've probably lost 20 pounds when I stop using willpower. All right. It just comes off, and I don't pay any attention to it anymore. I eat all day long. Exercise, a similar thing, but slightly different. People usually have a goal for exercise. I'm going to run a marathon. I'm going to do this and that. But suppose you could replace willpower in this situation with habit. There's lots of science now about how to create a habit, but it's not surprising. It's just like animals, right? If you have a treat after you do something, you'll do it more of it. You'll just get trained. If something hurts, you'll find a reason to do less of it, right, over time. You might not think that's why you're doing it, but you probably do. So let me give you a little bit more on this. So what I do is I underdo it. All right? That's my system. So I work out every day, because it turns out if you were to rank what's the important things about exercise, there's tons of it, right? There's books and books. It's like, how much protein do you get and when, and your hydration, and should you do this many reps, and is it light weights and big weights, and there's different science and all that. It's all confusing. But there's one thing that just sort of floats above all of that. That's the one thing you got to get right, all right? If you get that right, the other stuff can come together over time. But the one thing you got to get right is do it, right? And you have to do it kind of every day. So I'm active every day, but sometimes I define that as cleaning the garage if it's pretty active. But I don't skip a day, because if I skip a day, I lose habit. And what happens is that at about 11 o'clock every day, I'll be sitting at my desk, and my body will just start to vibrate, because it's time to exercise. And I literally can't even sit in my chair anymore, because I've trained myself that I'm going to exercise, I'm going to underdo it, I'm going to do just enough so I want to do it again tomorrow, I'll never hurt myself, and I'll give myself a treat at the end, a nice smoothie or something I like. And so that's habit over willpower. Here's another trick I learned from my hypnosis teacher. I took a class in hypnosis when I was in my 20s. I thought it would help in dating. So that's an entirely different story. But one of the things I learned in my hypnosis class from my professor, he said, try this trick. There'll be those days when you don't want to exercise. You come home and you're like, no, I gotta. It's just not there today. Put on your exercise shoes, right? Your sneakers, your athletic wear. Just do that. And it'd be good if you put on your shorts as well. But you'll find that just the mere association of the clothing triggers in your head of the little exercise subroutine. And if you just walk around and have a snack and feed the dog, 10 minutes later, ask yourself if you feel like exercising. And you'll be surprised, all right? It literally is just a trigger. Because when you have this clothes on, you exercise, so you put the clothes on, and your body says, I guess I'm exercising now. And it just throws you into that mode. If there's nothing else you agreed with, liked, or heard today, do this one thing, all right? Because that will make all the other stuff look more credible, if it works. All right. So putting it all together, if you can imagine this as a system, I put diet and exercise at the bottom. It turns out that if you don't get your diet and exercise right, you don't look the way you want to, and there's tons of science saying that everything you want out of life is going to come easier if you look good, right? And usually fitness is about 80% of what it takes to look good, right? That's most of the deal. But if you've done those things right, you've got enough energy to take on the challenges that you're probably going to be failing at a lot. So that's kind of what my system looks like. Now let's talk about passion. Totally overrated. But why is it that these guys always tell you that's the deal? If you say, hey, billionaire, as in fact each of these fellows said exactly the same thing, they said passion is the key when asked. Now ask yourself, what was the other ways they could have answered that question? Could they have said, I think I'm rich because I'm smarter than poor people? They could not say that. Not in public, even if they thought so. Could they say it's because I worked harder than other people? No, because their housekeeper works harder than they do, right? And they know that. So it wasn't hard work. They can't say I'm lucky, right? Because then their whole mystique is gone. Imagine Warren Buffett say, the first billion was totally luck, but you should invest in me anyway, right? That doesn't work. So what can they say in public that doesn't make them seem like gigantic douchebags, right? And the answer is passion, right? They've all had media training, all right? I've had media training. You're not going to answer the question with an honest answer if it doesn't, fit your needs, all right? So here's the beauty of passion. If I tell you to go find your passion, you're going to say, yeah, I could do that, right? Because it sounds so approachable. It's so democratic. Everybody can get passionate about something. But here's the problem. What do you do when you're waiting for your passion, right? I mean, does it come? Is it on a schedule? What if it doesn't come? What if you're the kind of person who isn't passionate? People ask me if, I actually made this comment in writing to a reporter who sent it to Warren Buffett and said, look what this guy says about your passion thing. And Warren Buffett actually wrote back to me and sent me an email through a third party. He said, oh, Scott, I don't think you believe this really. You're just saying these things. Take, for example, an NBA player. Right? Somebody reaches the height of the NBA, there's no way that passion didn't make the difference to that person. And I couldn't respond because the email came through a third party. But I looked at this and I thought to myself, Warren, you know who else was passionate about being an NBA player? Me, right? It didn't help me at all. Right? So, and I had another friend I played tennis with who heard me say this, and he said the same thing. He said, you know, look at the people on American Idol, the winners. He goes, obviously passion made a difference. And there's no way that they would put themselves through all that work, all that heartache, all that rejection without passion driving them. I said to him, do you watch the whole show from the beginning, like the series, or do you just like tune in to the top 5? Because when I watch it, I see stadiums full of losers. What do they have in common? Passion, right? Every one of these idiots is passionate. Didn't help them a bit. The first time I heard this idea was many years ago. My first job out of college was a bank. Eventually, I became a commercial lender, and my boss was a 30-year veteran, and he said, "You would never make a loan to someone who's passionate." He said, "They are here for the wrong reason." He goes, guy comes in, he says, "I'm passionate about sports. I love sports. I want to start a sporting goods store." He's like, out of here. Guy comes in, he says, "I want to start a dry cleaning business. I've done the numbers. Here's my spreadsheet. I've run 2 successful businesses in the past. I've looked at this area. There's no competition. I work hard. I put my own money into this." That guy gets the loan, right? And then you say to him, "How passionate are you about dry cleaning?" And he'll be like, "I didn't even know that mattered," right? Look around you in this campus, everything from those expensive cameras to these computers to the furniture in here. All of this was made by people who probably somebody at the top of the chain got rich, if not the founder, maybe CEOs who ran the company later. Are they passionate about guardrails? Are they passionate about carpet? Probably not. Somebody said to me, "But surely you're passionate about cartooning." I said, I would have been passionate about any of those 36 things if they made me this frickin' rich. Because it turns out that passion follows success, right? But you can usually feel it early. That's one of the things about success. Things that are going to work, they kind of work early. You at least there's something about them that works. That's why you stick with it. So, I say, forget the passion, work on your health, your energy, get your energy up, you're going to need that, all right? So I'm double mugging because I heard that passion is necessary for success. By 4 p.m., I'll be so passionate, I'll be dating my chair. Nothing about that sounded right. Now let's talk about luck. Luck is the giant elephant in the room. Chris was talking about this earlier, and I was nodding my head the whole time as you were talking. Because some people think of luck this way, all right? It's a thing you can't control, all right? Luck is like the lightning, all right? You don't control the lightning just, it hits who it's going to hit. Well, that's not exactly true, is it, Chris? Right? That's not exactly true. Because if you wanted to be hit by lightning, it would help to go outside, go outdoors, right? It would help if you went out in the rain, all right? If that's not enough, maybe you could get a bunch of lightning rods. You could connect them together in some kind of a network, go to the place where it has the most lightning strikes in the entire planet, climb that mountain, sit in that frickin' mountain until you get hit by lightning, all right? So the thing is, you can control that part. You can control the odds. You can't control the odds, but you can go where the odds are better. First thing I did when I got out of my little town of Windham, New York, 40 people in my graduating class, 2,000 people in my town. I knew every one of those idiots. I sold my car for a one-way ticket to California. And I came here because I knew that just being here would be better odds, all right? That's a system. Now, luck is a little more interesting than just, you can go where the odds are. There was a researcher, Dr. Richard Wiseman, who studied luck, and he wanted to find out if there are individuals who are actually lucky. Like, is that actually a thing? Now, as you might imagine, it's not, right? He did the studies. Nobody could guess things better than other people. There's no ESP. There's no luck. But then he did this test. And this was really interesting. He had people who identified as lucky and people who identified as unlucky, and he separated them, and he said, do this task. He said, count the number of photographs in this newspaper. The unlucky people who said they were unlucky, counted them up, and they got the right number on average. There were 42 photographs. The people who considered themselves lucky also got the same number, but they were done in seconds. The other ones took minutes. The difference was that on average, the lucky people noticed that on page 2 of this newspaper, it said in big writing, stop counting the photographs, there are 42. Right? And what he found in subsequent studies is that people who expect luck are just scanning for it. They're literally looking for luck, right? Because they expect it. Right? You look for things you expect, you don't look for things you don't expect. I was asked earlier about affirmations, which is just writing down your goals 15 times a day. It's something I did. I don't think there's any magic to it. I don't think it changes the universe directly, unless the universe is a software hologram, which I think is true, but that's another story. But it turns out that just positive thinking, wouldn't matter if it was prayer, affirmations, anything that made you say, okay, I'm going to act like a lucky person and look for luck because I know scientifically it works, that seemed to be good enough. Right? So simply knowing that looking for luck works is probably good enough. All right, so just kind of coming to the big finish here. Passion, forget about that, and luck, you don't need any of that. Got some comics to round things out. What is the key to success? Hire the right employees. How do you know you hired the right ones? You know because the business is successful. So the key to success is circular reasoning? Yes, because circular reasoning is the key. I worked around the clock and finished a project that would normally require 10 programmers. Did I just establish a new baseline expectation that will turn my job into a tragic death march? It's time to set some stretch goals. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Experts say lazy employees are the best because they know how to find shortcuts. So you found a lot of shortcuts? Me? No, I'm not lazy, I'm useless. Then why did you bring it up? Why wouldn't I? I'm not lazy. This last cartoon has nothing to do with anything. I just like to have it last because it's one of my favorites. I would like to say that before I show you this, I'm really happy I came here, not just because I got to meet great folks, but because I have asthma, toe fungus, and I snore. So let me tell you, you've had a good day. I just had a really good day. So my boss says we need some eunuch programmers. I think he means Unix, not Unix, and I already know Unix. If the company nurse drops by, tell her I said never mind. Thank you. You want me to take questions, or we'll wrap up?
I think we're ready. Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yay, Scott Adams, everyone.